When my daughter-in-law told me to get out of my own house, I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg her to let me stay. I just stood there in the hallway, the one I had walked down 1,000 times, the one I had mopped every single Saturday morning for 31 years. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because something deep inside me, something quiet and steady, told me that God was watching. That He saw every single thing that was happening in that hallway on that cold Tuesday evening. I picked up the small bag she had already packed for me. She had done it while I was sleeping. Can you imagine that? She had gone into my bedroom, opened my drawers, taken out a few of my things, and put them in a bag. Like I was a guest who had stayed too long. Like I was a stranger. My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old. That house, the one she told me to leave, I built it with my husband Emmanuel before he passed away. We poured our savings into every brick. We painted those walls ourselves. We planted the garden out front with our own hands. That was my home. Not just a house. My home. But on that Tuesday evening, I walked out of it with a small bag and a quiet heart. And I want to tell you everything that happened. From the very beginning. Because this story is not just about pain. It is about what God does when people think He is not looking. It is about what happens when you stay quiet and keep your faith, even when the world feels like it is falling apart around you. So settle in. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was born in a small village. My mother used to say that I came into this world smiling. She said the midwife laughed and said, "This one is going to be trouble, she is too happy already." My mother would always chuckle when she told that story. I grew up in a modest home. We did not have much, but we had each other. My parents worked hard, and they taught me that the most important things in life are not things at all. They are people. They are moments. They are the way you treat someone when nobody else is watching. I married Emmanuel when I was 24 years old. He was a quiet man. Not the loud, flashy kind that makes a big impression in a room. He was the kind of man who would notice if you had not eaten and quietly put food in front of you without saying a word. He was gentle. He was steady. And he loved me in the way that good men love, not with grand speeches, but with small, consistent kindness every single day. We could not have children right away. For the first 5 years of our marriage, we waited and prayed. It was hard. I will not pretend it was not. There were evenings when I would sit on the back step of our little rented house and just look at the sky and wonder why. But Emmanuel would always come and sit beside me. He never said much. He just sat there. And somehow, that was enough. Then God blessed us. First came our son Daniel. And 2 years later, our daughter Grace. We were so full of joy that we did not know what to do with ourselves. Emmanuel cried when Daniel was born. Big, silent tears that rolled down his face while he held that tiny baby. I had never loved him more than in that moment. We worked hard to give our children a good life. Emmanuel took on extra work on weekends. I used to sew clothes for neighbors to earn a little extra money. We saved every coin we could. And when Daniel was 7 years old, we finally built our own home. It took 3 years to finish it completely. 3 years of brick by brick, weekend by weekend. But when it was done, we stood in the front yard and looked at it together, the 4 of us, and Emmanuel put his arm around my shoulder and said, "We did it, Margaret." That house became everything. It was more than walls and a roof. It was the place where Daniel learned to ride his bicycle in the driveway. It was the place where Grace practiced her school plays in the living room. It was the kitchen where I cooked Sunday meals that filled the whole street with the smell of good food. It was the garden where Emmanuel and I would sit in the evenings, long after the children had gone to bed, and just be quiet together. Daniel grew up to be a responsible young man. He was not the most talkative child, but he was thoughtful. He always thought things through before he spoke. He studied hard, got good grades, and eventually found a steady job as an engineer at a construction company. I was so proud of him. Every parent says their child is special, but Daniel truly was. He had a good heart. And then, when Daniel was 31 years old, he met Vivian. I want to be careful here. I want to be honest, but I also want to be fair. Because this story is not about making Vivian into a monster. People are complicated. Life is complicated. And even the people who hurt us are carrying things we cannot always see. But I will tell you what I saw. I will tell you what happened. And I will let you decide for yourself. Vivian was beautiful. That much was obvious the first moment Daniel brought her home. She had a sharp kind of beauty, the kind that makes a room go quiet when you walk in. She dressed well. She spoke well. She was charming and polished and knew exactly what to say and when to say it. She was also the only child of her parents. She had grown up with everything she wanted. Not in a cruel way, her parents were kind people. But they had given her so much that she had never really learned to share. And she had never really learned to receive love from people who were not her own parents. When Daniel told me he was going to marry her, I was happy for him. I truly was. I could see that he loved her deeply. And I believed that love could build bridges between people. I believed that time and patience could make a family work. So I welcomed Vivian into my home with open arms. I cooked her favorite meals. I asked her about her life and her dreams. I made space for her in our family. I wanted her to feel that she belonged. And for a little while, things were good. Emmanuel passed away 6 years after Daniel and Vivian got married. It was sudden. A heart attack, the doctors said. He was there in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking his tea the way he always did, slowly, both hands around the cup. And by the afternoon, he was gone. The grief was like nothing I had ever felt before. It was heavy in a way that had no words. It pressed on my chest every morning when I woke up and reached for the other side of the bed. It sat with me at the dinner table when I ate alone. It followed me into the garden where the two of us used to sit together in the evenings. Daniel and Grace were both devastated. We leaned on each other through those first months. Grace lived in another city by then. She had gotten married and moved away a few years earlier. But she called me every single day. Sometimes twice a day. Just to hear my voice. Just to make sure I was eating. That is the kind of daughter Grace was. Daniel, who lived closer, came by every weekend. He helped me with the house. He fixed things that needed fixing. He checked on me constantly. And Vivian came with him most of the time in those early months. But I noticed, even then, that something had shifted. It was small things at first. The kind of things you almost dismiss because you think you must be imagining them. Vivian stopped calling me Mama, the way she had been doing for years. She started calling me Margaret instead. Not unkindly. Just differently. Like there was now some distance being placed between us that had not been there before. She stopped eating my food. She would always have some reason: she had eaten already, or she was watching what she ate, or the food was too rich for her stomach. I did not say anything. I told myself it was nothing. But then there were the comments about the house. One Saturday, Vivian walked into my kitchen while I was cooking and said, in a light, casual voice, "Margaret, this kitchen is really quite small, isn't it? When we renovate, we should definitely expand it." I looked up from my pot. "Renovate?" I asked. She smiled. "Well, yes. You know. Eventually. When you decide to update things." She looked around the kitchen as if she was already seeing something different in her mind. Then she turned and walked back into the living room. I stood there by my stove for a moment. Something small and uncomfortable moved through my chest. But I told myself it was nothing. She was just talking. People say things like that. A few months later, Daniel sat down with me at the kitchen table, the one where his father used to drink his morning tea, and he spoke to me in that careful, measured way he had learned from his father. He said, "Mama, Vivian and I have been talking. We think it might make sense, if you agree, of course, for us to move in here with you. So that you are not alone. And so that we can take care of the house." I looked at my son's face. His eyes were kind. I could see that he was genuinely worried about me. He did not want me to be alone in this big house, rattling around by myself. I understood that. And so I said yes. I want you to understand what I was thinking in that moment. I was thinking about my husband. I was thinking that Emmanuel had worked his whole life for that house. I was thinking that I wanted it to stay in the family, to be lived in and loved. I was thinking that having my son under the same roof would ease the loneliness that had wrapped itself around me since Emmanuel died. So I said yes. And they moved in. At first, it was fine. The house felt alive again. There were voices in the rooms. There was movement and sound. Daniel's car in the driveway. Vivian's heels clicking on the tiles in the morning as she got ready for work. It reminded me of when the children were growing up. It felt like life was happening again inside those walls. But within a few months, I began to feel something that I could not quite name at first. I began to feel like a guest. It happened so gradually that I almost did not notice until it had already happened. Vivian began rearranging things. Small things at first: the cushions on the sofa, the position of the dining chairs. Then bigger things. She moved my photograph of Emmanuel from the wall in the hallway to a shelf in the back room. When I asked her about it, she said, "Oh, I just thought it would look better there. More private." I nodded and said nothing. She repainted the living room without asking me. She said it was a surprise, that she wanted to brighten things up. The color she chose was fine, I suppose. But it was not the color I had chosen 30 years ago. It was not the color that Emmanuel had helped me pick out on a Sunday afternoon from a little paint shop in town. I stood in the doorway and looked at the new walls and felt something close. Like a door being gently shut. She started buying new furniture and putting my old things in storage. "The old pieces are lovely, Margaret," she would say, "but they are a bit worn, don't you think?" And piece by piece, my home began to look less and less like my home. I started spending more time in my bedroom. It felt like the one room that was still mine. The kitchen was the hardest to lose. I had always been the one who cooked in that kitchen. For 40 years, I had made every meal in that kitchen. But Vivian took over the cooking and made it clear, in the polite but firm way she had of doing things, that the kitchen was her domain now. "You should rest, Margaret," she would say. "You've done enough cooking for one lifetime." She was not entirely wrong, I suppose. I was not as young as I used to be. But there is a difference between someone saying "let me help you cook" and someone saying "you no longer cook here." And what Vivian was saying, even when her words sounded kind, was the second thing. I started eating alone in my room some evenings. Not because anyone told me to, but because I could feel, in the way that old women learn to feel things without being told, that my presence at the dinner table was becoming inconvenient. Daniel noticed, of course. He is a perceptive man. He would come to my room and sit with me and we would talk. He would ask me how I was doing. I always said I was fine. Because what else do you say to your son? He loved his wife. And I loved him. And I did not want to be the thing that stood between those two loves. But the tension in the house was building. The way tension always builds, quietly, slowly, like water finding its way under a door. And then came the evenings when Daniel had to work late. Those evenings when it was just me and Vivian in the house. She was never cruel. Not openly. Not in the way that makes it easy to say, she was cruel to me. She was cold. She was distant. She would sit in the living room watching her programs, and I would walk through to get a glass of water, and she would not look up. Would not speak. Would answer my greeting with a sound that was not quite a yes and not quite a no. One evening, I sat beside her and tried to talk. I asked her about her work. I asked about her friends. I tried, the way I had always tried, to build something between us. And she looked at me, not unkindly, but clearly, and she said, "Margaret, I'm quite tired. It's been a long day." And she looked back at her program. I got up. I walked to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed. And for the first time since Emmanuel had died, I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, with my hands in my lap. Because I was lonely in a way I had not been even in the worst days of my grief. Because I was in my own house and I felt like I had nowhere to go. It was my granddaughter who changed everything. Daniel and Vivian had a daughter, little Amara. She was 3 years old at the time all of this was happening. She had her father's eyes and her grandmother's smile, and from the very first day she was born, she had stolen every piece of my heart that Emmanuel had not already taken with him. Amara loved me. Children are honest in a way that adults forget how to be. She did not feel the tension in the house. She did not understand the silent rules that Vivian had put in place. She just loved her grandmother the way children love, completely and without condition. She would come to my room in the mornings, before anyone else was awake, and she would climb into my bed and press her little head against my shoulder. And in those mornings, I felt like myself again. I used to tell her stories. Old stories. The kind my mother had told me. Stories about the village, about the river, about the clever little girl who outsmarted the lion. Amara loved those stories. Her eyes would go wide and she would gasp at all the right moments. Vivian did not like it. She never said it directly. But I could see it. The way her expression changed when she walked past my door and heard Amara laughing with me. The way she would come in and say, "Amara, come now, it's time for breakfast," in a voice that had a small edge in it. The way she began, slowly, to manage when and how long Amara could spend time with me. "Amara needs a schedule," she told Daniel one evening. I heard them from my room. She can't just run in and out of your mother's room all morning. It disrupts her routine. I heard Daniel say something soft in return. I could not make out the words. But the next morning, Amara did not come to my room. She came the morning after. And the morning after that. Children are persistent in the best possible way. But I could see the conflict in her little face sometimes, like she was doing something she had been told not to do. And I would not have that. I would not be the reason that child felt torn. So I began to distance myself gently, for her sake. I would not come to her as freely. I let the visits happen naturally instead of reaching for them. It broke something in me that I am not sure has fully healed. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday. Daniel was away for work. He had gone to a project site in another city and would not be back until Saturday. It was just Vivian and me in the house, and little Amara. I had stayed mostly in my room that day. I had learned by then to keep to myself when Daniel was not home. I had my small television. I had my books. I had my prayers. I stayed out of Vivian's way and she stayed out of mine, and we existed in that house like two people trying very hard not to take up too much of each other's air. In the evening, around 7 o'clock, I heard Vivian on the phone in the living room. She was talking to someone, a friend, I think. I was not trying to listen. The walls of that house were not thick, and Vivian did not speak quietly. I heard my name. I heard her say, "She just sits in there all day. Every single day. Like a piece of old furniture that nobody knows what to do with." I put down the book I was reading. I heard her say, "Daniel won't say anything because she is his mother. But I am telling you, it is my house and I am done pretending to be comfortable when I am not." I sat very still. She said, she had her time. She had her life. It is our turn now. And I cannot build my family properly with her sitting in the middle of everything. I did not hear the rest of it. I had stopped being able to hear properly. There was a kind of ringing in my ears that sometimes comes when something hits too close to the bone. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same way I had sat the night I first cried after Emmanuel died, and I breathed. Slowly. In and out. The way you learn to breathe when life teaches you that falling apart is not always an option. I thought about Emmanuel. I thought about what he would do. Emmanuel was the kind of man who believed that God was in the details. He used to say, "Margaret, when things get hard, get quiet. Because God speaks in the quiet." So I got quiet. But the quiet did not last as long as I needed it to. 2 days later, on the Saturday when Daniel came home, Vivian sat him down before he had even taken off his coat. I was in the kitchen, getting myself a cup of tea. I heard her voice, low and firm. I heard her say, "We need to talk about your mother." I did not move. I stood at the counter with my cup in my hand. I heard pieces of what she said. That the arrangement was not working. That she had tried. That she needed her home to feel like her home. That she could not be a wife and a mother and also manage the presence of another woman in her space. And then I heard something that cut through the floor of my chest and went somewhere deeper. I heard her say, "Daniel, it is me or her. I cannot do both." There was a long silence. And then I heard my son. My gentle, thoughtful, careful son. And he said words that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He said, "Mama won't want to cause any trouble. I'll talk to her." I set down my cup. I walked to my bedroom. I sat on my bed. I looked at the window, the one that faced the garden where Emmanuel and I used to sit in the evenings. And I made a decision. A quiet, steady decision. I would not make my son choose. That night, I lay awake for many hours. I listened to the house. The creak of the floors. The sound of the wind in the garden. The distant sound of the television from the living room. All the sounds of a home that had been mine for 31 years. I said goodbye to each one of them in my heart. The next morning was Sunday. Daniel knocked on my door while the house was still quiet. He came in and sat in a chair by the window, the chair where Emmanuel used to sit when he came to talk to me about serious things. And I could see, written all over my son's face, the war that was happening inside him. He could barely look at me. He started with preambles. He talked about how things had been difficult. About how marriage is complicated. About how he wanted everyone to be happy. I watched his face while he talked and I loved him with a completeness that surprised even me. And then he said it. He said, "Mama, I think it might be better, just for now, if you stayed somewhere else for a while. Just until things settle down. Maybe Grace's place. Or we could find you somewhere nice, close by. It wouldn't be permanent. Just for a little while." I looked at my son. I thought about the night he was born and how Emmanuel had cried. I thought about his little face when he was learning to walk and he would fall down and look up at me and then get right back up again. I thought about the school plays and the late-night study sessions and the morning he left for his first job interview in the suit we had ironed together the night before. I said, "All right, Daniel." He exhaled. Like he had been holding his breath for days. He said, "Mama, I'm sorry." I said, "You don't need to be sorry. I understand." He started to say more, but I shook my head gently and he stopped. That evening, I went to my wardrobe and I began to put my things in a bag. And that was when Vivian appeared in the doorway. She had already packed a bag for me, a separate one, with things she had chosen herself. She held it out to me. Her face was composed. Not cruel. Just finished with something. She said, "I think this is better for everyone, Margaret." And I smiled. Not the smile of someone who has no feelings. But the smile of someone who has placed her feelings somewhere very deep and very safe, where they cannot be used against her. The smile of someone who has decided that she will not let this moment, however painful it is, define her. I took my bag. I walked down that hallway one more time. I looked at the walls, the new color that Vivian had chosen. I looked at the place where Emmanuel's photograph used to hang. I stepped out through the front door. And I did not look back. I went to Grace's house. Grace lived about 40 minutes away in a smaller house with her husband Thomas and their 2 children. When I arrived at her door that Sunday night with my bags, she took one look at my face and she opened her arms and held me without asking a single question. She put me in the bedroom that her children used for guests. It was a small room with a window that faced a quiet street. She brought me tea and she sat on the edge of the bed and she held my hands and she listened while I told her everything. Every word of it. Slowly and calmly, the way I have always told things. When I finished, she sat very still for a moment. And then she said, "Mama, I am going to call Daniel." I said, "Grace. Please don't." "Not yet." She looked at me. I said, "I need some time. Just a little time to be quiet." She nodded. She trusted me. That is the thing about Grace, she has always trusted me. Even when she did not understand my reasons, she trusted that I had them. The first few days at Grace's house were strange. I felt unmoored in a way that is difficult to describe. Like a boat that has been cut loose from its dock, not sinking, but uncertain. Not knowing which direction the current would take me. I spent a lot of time by that small window. I watched the street. I watched the neighbors come and go. I watched the light change across the day, the pale gray of early morning, the gold of midday, the soft orange of late afternoon. I prayed a lot. Long, quiet prayers that were less like requests and more like conversations. Like sitting with someone in silence and knowing that the silence itself is enough. Grace was gentle with me in the way that grown daughters can be gentle with their mothers when they finally understand what it means to be a woman navigating the world. She did not hover. She did not ask too many questions. She simply made sure I ate. Made sure I slept. Made sure I was never alone for too long. Her husband Thomas was a good man. He never made me feel like a burden. He would sit with me in the evenings and we would watch the news together, and sometimes he would make small jokes that made me laugh despite myself. Those small laughs were more healing than he probably knew. I did not hear from Daniel for the first week. That silence was one of the hardest things I have ever lived through. Because I knew he knew where I was. Grace would have told him, or he would have figured it out easily enough. But he did not call. And with every day that passed without a call, I had to work very hard at keeping the bitterness from growing inside me. Bitterness is a seed, you know. If you water it with your attention every day, it will grow into something enormous that takes over everything. I had seen it happen to other people. I was determined not to let it happen to me. So every morning, I would sit by my window and I would make a deliberate choice. I would choose not to be bitter. I would choose to believe that my son was a good man who was caught in an impossible place. I would choose to trust that God, who had seen everything that happened in that hallway, everything that was said in that living room, would bring things right in his own time. It was not always easy. There were evenings when Grace would be in the kitchen and her children would be laughing in the other room and Thomas would be reading in the chair by the lamp, and I would feel the full weight of what I had lost. The home. The belonging. The daily presence of my grandchild. Those evenings were very long. But then something began to happen. Something quiet and unexpected. I started to breathe again. Living at Grace's house, away from the tension and the walking on eggshells and the constant awareness of being unwanted, I began to remember who I was. I started cooking again. Grace had a lovely kitchen and she welcomed me into it with the kind of openness that Vivian had never shown. We cooked together on Sunday mornings, the two of us, singing old songs and talking about our mother and laughing at nothing and everything. I started working in Grace's garden. It was small and a little neglected, and I began to tend to it the way I had always tended to my own garden at home. I planted tomatoes and herbs and a small row of marigolds along the fence. Getting my hands in the soil every morning reminded me of something Emmanuel had once said. He had said, "Margaret, the earth does not ask you where you came from or what went wrong. It just grows what you give it." I gave it care. And it grew. About 3 weeks after I arrived at Grace's house, Daniel called. Grace brought me the phone and I took it and walked to my little room and sat by the window and said, "Hello, Daniel." There was a pause. And then my son said, "Mama." Just that one word. But the way he said it. I could hear everything in it. The shame. The regret. The love that had never gone anywhere but had gotten buried under everything else. I could hear my little boy in that word. The one who used to fall down while learning to walk and get right back up again. I said, I am here. He began to talk. He talked for a long time. He told me how wrong things had gone. He told me that after I left, the house had not felt the way he expected it to feel. He had thought, or perhaps he had hoped, that the tension would ease. That Vivian would be happier. That things would settle into the calm she had promised they would settle into. But the house had just become quiet in a way that felt like absence, not peace. He told me that Amara had asked for me every day for 2 weeks. Every morning she had gone to my bedroom door and knocked on it and called, "Grandma? Grandma?" And the empty room had been its own kind of answer. He said that one evening, about 10 days after I left, little Amara had gone to that empty room and sat down in the middle of the floor and cried. A deep, inconsolable cry that even Vivian had not known how to stop. I closed my eyes when he told me that. He said that in that moment, something had cracked open in him. He said that he had looked at his daughter sitting on the floor of that empty room crying for her grandmother, and he had understood, fully understood, for the first time, what he had allowed to happen. What he had been too afraid to prevent. He said that he had sat with Vivian that night and he had spoken to her honestly for the first time in a long time. He said he had told her things he should have said months ago, maybe even years ago. That this was his mother's house. That his mother was not a guest to be managed. That a home is not built on the comfort of one person at the expense of another. That Amara needed her grandmother, and he needed his mother, and if they were going to build a real life together, they had to build it with honesty and with room for everyone who mattered. He said Vivian had been silent for a very long time when he finished. And then she had started to cry. He said it was a kind of crying he had not seen from her before. Not angry crying. Not defensive crying. But the soft, breaking kind, the kind that comes when someone has been carrying something heavy for so long that they finally cannot hold it anymore. He said she had told him things about herself that she had never told him before. About growing up as an only child and always feeling that there was not enough love to go around. About being afraid that she would lose her husband to his family. About how that fear had made her do things that she knew, deep down, were not right. He said she had asked him, quietly, without drama, if she could speak to me. I sat there by my window and I held the phone and I thought about all of it. I thought about Emmanuel. I thought about the garden I had planted at Grace's house. I thought about what it means to carry a fear so deep inside you that it shapes everything you do without you even realizing it. I said, "Tell her I will come for Sunday lunch." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mama." I said, "Sunday lunch. All of us. Tell Amara her grandma is coming." That Sunday, Grace drove me to the house. We pulled up in front of it and I looked at it from the car. It looked the same as it always had from the outside. The same fence. The same garden, my garden, though a little overgrown since I had not been there to tend to it. The same porch where Emmanuel and I had taken our morning teas on good days. I breathed in. I breathed out. Grace squeezed my hand. I got out of the car. Before I had even reached the front gate, the door opened and Amara came flying out. Running with that full body, arms-wide commitment that only small children have. She hit me like a warm little wave and wrapped herself around my legs and said, "Grandma. You came back. You came back." I bent down and held her. I pressed my face into her hair. I said, I came back, my love. Grandma always comes back. And standing there on the path to my house, holding my granddaughter, I let myself cry for a moment. Just a quiet moment. The kind of crying that is not entirely sad. Daniel was waiting at the door. He stepped forward and held me for a long time. He did not say anything. He just held me. And I held him back. And that was enough. Then I looked up. Vivian was standing in the hallway. The hallway I had walked down 1,000 times. She was wearing a simple dress. Her usual composure was not entirely there. She looked like someone who had been through something difficult and knew it. She looked younger, somehow. Or maybe more real. We looked at each other. She said, "Margaret." And her voice was different from how it usually was. Smaller. More careful. I said, "Vivian." She said, "I have been wanting to say something to you for a long time. But I did not know how." I waited. She said, "I was wrong. Not just about what I did. But about how I saw things. I made you feel unwanted in your own home. And I told myself I had good reasons, but..." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. She looked at the floor. "But there is no good reason for that. For making someone feel that way. Especially someone who has only ever been kind to me." I looked at this woman who had caused me so much pain. And I thought about what Daniel had told me. About her fears. About the little girl inside her who had always been afraid there was not enough love to go around. I said, "Vivian. Come here." She looked up. I opened my arms. She hesitated for just a moment. And then she came. And I held her the way I would hold a daughter. The way I had always wanted to hold her, if she had ever let me. She put her head on my shoulder and she cried the way she had cried with Daniel, that soft, breaking kind. And I held her and I said nothing, because sometimes nothing is exactly the right thing to say. Amara was standing to the side watching us with her serious little face. And then she walked over and hugged both of us at the same time, her small arms reaching around both our legs, and she said very simply, "Good." We all laughed. The kind of laughter that comes after tears. The best kind. We had lunch together that day. Grace and Thomas and their children. Daniel and Vivian and Amara. And me. All of us around the table in that house. The house that Emmanuel and I had built with our own hands. We ate and we talked and Amara sat on my lap for most of the meal and nobody said anything about it. After lunch, I walked out to the garden. My garden. I stood in the middle of it and looked at it, the overgrown grass, the rose bush that had gotten leggy without pruning, the marigolds that had somehow held on even without attention. I crouched down and touched the soil. I heard footsteps behind me. Vivian. She stood beside me and looked at the garden. She said, "I never knew how to garden. My mother tried to teach me once, but I didn't have the patience for it." I said, "Would you like to learn?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes. I think I would." I nodded. "Then we will start next weekend." We stood there together in the garden for a while. Not saying much. But something had shifted. Something real. Something that had taken too long to happen and had cost too much to arrive at. But it was there. I did not move back into the house right away. That was a conscious decision on my part. Not from stubbornness. Not from hurt. But from wisdom. I had learned something during those weeks at Grace's house. I had learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for a relationship is give it room to breathe. The distance had done something important. It had given Daniel and Vivian space to face each other without me in the middle. It had forced conversations that should have happened long before. And it had given me time to become, again, fully myself. So I stayed at Grace's for another few weeks. But things changed. Daniel and Vivian began calling me regularly. Not just Daniel, Vivian too. She would call to ask me small things. How to cook a particular dish. What she should do about something in the garden. What I thought about a decision she and Daniel were making. She was reaching toward me in the careful, tentative way of someone who is not sure they deserve to reach but is trying anyway. And I always answered her warmly. Because the reaching matters more than the uncertainty behind it. Amara started coming to visit me at Grace's house on weekends. Daniel would bring her on Saturday mornings and she would spend the whole day with me and Grace's children, running in the small garden, listening to stories, helping me water the marigolds. Those Saturdays were some of the best days of my older years. And slowly, the shape of things changed. When I did move back into the house, it was about 6 weeks later, something was different. Not everything. Not all at once. But something fundamental had shifted. Vivian had put Emmanuel's photograph back in the hallway. She had not said anything to me about it beforehand. I had simply walked in the front door one afternoon and there it was, his face, in its familiar frame, on the familiar wall. I stood there and looked at it for a long time. She had also cleared out space in the kitchen. She had rearranged things so that there was a corner that was clearly mine. My pots. My spices. My little recipe books that I had accumulated over a lifetime. She had arranged them carefully on a shelf and left them there for me. On my first evening back, she came into the kitchen while I was cooking. She did not try to take over. She stood near the doorway and watched and then she said, "Can I help?" I said, "You can peel those carrots." She picked up a carrot and looked at it for a moment and then she said, "I'm not entirely sure how to peel a carrot properly." I almost laughed. I said, "Come here." And she came. And I showed her. And she tried. And she was not very good at it. And we both laughed. We cooked together that evening. It was quiet and slow and not perfectly coordinated. There were moments of awkwardness. Moments of almost saying the wrong thing and then stopping. Moments of reaching for the same thing and pulling back. But it was honest. And honesty, even when it is clumsy, is always better than a perfect performance. That evening we all ate together at the table. All of us. Amara between her parents. Me at my usual chair, the one I had sat in for 30 years. And something settled in the room. Not all the old wounds closing. Not a perfect peace. But something real. Something worth protecting. Daniel caught my eye across the table at one point. And I saw in his face the same thing I had seen in it the day he was born. My son. My good, complicated, loving son. He was looking at me with an expression that said everything he would never be entirely able to put into words. I am 67 years old, and I am still in that house. My house. The one that Emmanuel and I built, brick by brick, before Daniel had learned to walk. The one with the garden I had been tending for 30 years. The one with the hallway where Emmanuel's photograph now hangs back in its proper place. Vivian and I work in the garden every Saturday morning now. It has become our time. We do not always talk about deep things. Sometimes we talk about the tomatoes. Sometimes she tells me about something that happened at her work during the week. Sometimes she asks me questions about her marriage, careful, honest questions that she trusts me to answer with equal honesty. And I do. Because the only thing I know how to be, after all these years, is honest. She is not my daughter. I do not want to pretend that everything is simple and easy and that all the pain of what happened just dissolved like it was never there. It did not. There are still tender spots. There are still moments. But there is also this, a woman who is trying. A woman who is learning. A woman who showed me, in her own complicated way, that fear is not the same as cruelty, and that the people who hurt us are almost always hurting themselves in ways we cannot see. I learned something through all of this. Something I want to leave you with. I learned that holding on, when holding on means clinging to what belongs to you, is not always strength. Sometimes real strength is in the letting go. Not giving up. Not surrendering. But releasing the need to fight over things that time and truth will sort out on their own. I walked out of my house that Tuesday evening not because I was weak. I walked out because I understood that you cannot force someone to see your value. You cannot argue your way into being loved or respected. Sometimes you have to step back quietly, so that the people who have forgotten your worth have a chance to remember it on their own. And God saw all of it. Every moment. The packing of that bag. The walk down the hallway. The tears in the car on the way to Grace's house. The weeks of sitting by a small window, breathing and praying and choosing, every single morning, not to become bitter. He saw it. And in his own time, in the way he always does things, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly and surely, he brought things right. I am not telling you this story so that you will feel sorry for me. I am not telling it so that you will think I am a saint. I am not. I made my own mistakes in all of this. Things I could have said sooner. Things I could have handled differently. This life does not come with a clean script. We all stumble our way through it. I am telling you this story because I know that somewhere out there, someone is sitting in their own pain right now. Maybe you are the one who was pushed out. Maybe you are the one who did the pushing. Maybe you are standing in a hallway with a bag in your hand, not knowing whether to stay or go. Maybe you are lying awake at night wondering if the people you love will ever really see you. Maybe you are carrying a fear so deep inside you that it is making you do things you know are wrong but cannot seem to stop. To all of you, I want to say this. Keep your faith. Not as a phrase or a performance, but as a real, daily practice. Trust that God sees what you cannot show the world. Trust that the quiet choices, to be kind when you want to be cold, to forgive when you want to hold on, to let go when everything in you wants to fight, those quiet choices matter. They change things, even when you cannot see the change happening. Take care of yourself. Even in the midst of it. Even when it feels selfish. Because you cannot pour from an empty cup. I needed those weeks at Grace's house. I needed the garden. I needed the mornings by that small window. Not as an escape, but as a restoration. And love the people who have hurt you from a place of wisdom, not just sentiment. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It is not the same as pretending it did not happen or that it did not hurt. It is the decision to stop letting the past live in your present. To stop carrying what belongs to the past. To put it down, not for the other person's sake, but for your own. Emmanuel's photograph is back on the wall. The garden is full. Amara still comes to my room every morning and presses her head against my shoulder. And on some Saturday evenings, when the light is the right kind of gold and the garden smells of marigolds and warm earth, I sit on the back step of that house, my house, our house, and I look at the sky the way I used to look at it all those years ago when Emmanuel would come and sit beside me. He does not sit beside me anymore. But he is not entirely gone, either. He is in the walls. He is in the garden. He is in the face of my son and the laugh of my granddaughter. He is in the steadiness I feel in my chest when things get hard. And when the evenings get quiet enough, I can almost hear him. That steady, gentle voice. Saying the things he always said in the way he always said them. We did it, Margaret. Yes, Emmanuel. We did.